Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the Object 268. The Object 268 is a vehicle that I had at first no idea what this addition to the game would bring, because I looked at the stats and they were a bit deceiving if you just look for a Russian version of a Jagdtiger, because this vehicle isn't. It might have the raw appearance of a very good heavy tank chassis and a rather thick and bouncy upper casemate structure and a very powerful gun. But then you look at the stats and you realize the upper casemate isn't as thick and the battle rating is higher, and also several other stats about the gun don't look that good. But then you begin to compare it, and yet again it is a case of it's good that I collected the stats, that I compared it, because I learned a lot about this vehicle, and this brings also a very unique playstyle with it that I think you couldn't even come close to with the Jagdtiger. The Jagdtiger is truly a aerial denial vehicle, so to speak, so it can go into, for example, a road and block it when it's safe from side shots. And because side shots are always very dangerous for a casemate style tank destroyer, and so they're also very dangerous for this vehicle. However, where this vehicle stands is in many ways truly unique. So I will give you, of course, a full rundown on the statistics of this vehicle in this tank review, a major comparison to some very interesting opponents on the battlefield, and also a comparison to the IS-3 at the same battle rating, and that just shows how strange this vehicle really is. As usual, let's begin with the armor, and we can see that the hull is, in most cases, from the T10M, so 120mm lower plate at 49 degrees. Effective angle is 213mm, but I think the only APHE gun from the Germans that can go through is the one from the Jagdtiger, but it also can bounce, especially when you angle it. But the rest of the pike nose design then gets unangled a little bit, and so you might get pent then in this area, depending on the exact angle. So the pike nose design overall is a bit tricky. It's pre-angled for use, but when you face an opponent that can penetrate, for example, the lower plate, you have difficulties angling against. And one quick word about angling this tank: don't do it. You're making it worse. Overall, unlike, for example, on an IS-3 that actually can work with that. One of the reasons might be if your driver gets knocked out, or you get tracked, or your engine gets immobilized, you can't point your gun on the target, because like with the Jagdtiger, the gun angles are very limited. Then we also have the upper hull, and that is very bouncy indeed. I think there is no real solid shot or APHE that can go reliably through it. I guess you will bounce the overwhelming majority of shots. So the vehicle has difficulties actually penning itself on the upper hull, but through the lower hull it will go. You might be amused when you hear that right now, but I will have footage later on when we test this gun against a variety of targets, and you will be surprised about the power of this gun. Then there are those, I guess, mudguards here, and they are just 4mm thick, also those here, and you might think, well, they're useless, right? Well, they actually are pretty tricky when somebody fires on the move at you with hash. Usually against Russian vehicles, this is always a very devastating blow, hitting the hull here with a 105mm hash shell, or 120mm, doesn't matter. it will go right through, because 127 millimeters is the thickness and you will pass right through. But this is a recently designed vehicle, so that means there are details that on older vehicles there aren't. For example, the T10M. It has the same shape of the hull, however those mudguards aren't modeled, so the T10M is much more vulnerable to hash. So those small mudguards here seem to be, very unimportant, but yet they absorb a huge amount of incoming hash fire. Then we also have this driver's hatch, and it's modeled like on a T10M, so you can get shot trapped, and it's rather thick, even against very big high explosive shells. When somebody hits you here with a big high explosive shell, for example, in arcade, another 152 millimeter high explosive shell, and will splash right through. So, yeah, that's the hull. Now, you might say, okay, the hull is the same as from the T10M, but that's not quite right. First of all, we have the side armor with 80 millimeters here, and that's the flat part behind the tracks. But then there's the big difference. There, it's also 80 millimeters angled at 60 degrees, so this gives you a very big chance of bouncing solid shots. Not APDS, so there is for me a difference between a solid shot and APDS, just to make this clear. And also the upper hull is 60 millimeters. And then you have obviously those the spaced armor with 4 millimeters, so that makes it rather hash resistant in this area. So when we compare it to the T10M, we can see we also have here 80 millimeters, but there it's 30 millimeters, and that's a huge difference. And also we have here this barn with 120 millimeters that we don't have, so the chassis is modified. Again, the Object 268 is based on the T10M chassis, but it's different. Then we come to the upper casement, and like with the Jagdtiger, we have a very thick casement overall, but it's not that angled in certain areas. First of all, the gun mantle, as on the Jagdtiger, very thick. Not as thick, but still enough to make this vehicle around this area pretty safe from hash and yeah, even certain heat shells. Not all of them, because heat melts right through a lot of things. But from the 90mm heat shells, you might not get penetrated. Then there is this flat part around here, and it's just 187mm thick. So that is cast homogeneous armor, and it's around about the same thickness as the turret front of a Jagdtiger. And it's flat, so everything will pen you, except, again, hash. So solid shots, APHE shots, APDS, heat FS, everything will go through. Then we have this area, it's angled, and you can see immediately we have effective thickness of even over half a meter of steel. So it's a bit trollish here. Here it begins to flatten out a little bit again, between 270 and 350 millimeters. Those outer parts are again relatively angled. So again, when you angle the vehicle, you unangle this part. The side here is 100 millimeters, so again, kind of safe from the 90mm hash, but not the 105mm, like the rear of the vehicle, which is actually pretty weak with 50mm, because this is a huge target for certain AAA vehicles. And even the 40mm Bofors with the AP rounds will pass through and do damage. We will later see why this huge area is important. The deck armor is relatively weak with 30mm, so again, you're vulnerable to air attacks, especially from Hortons, but that's not a big surprise. And even those 5mm here, I mean, if somebody manages to hit this, even machine gun rounds might go through. Then the rear of the vehicle, 60mm with additional tracking. So that's not very, it's not very bad here, but not really worth talking about. The roof here is also 30mm. We also have the rangefinder, but that is not, in the damage model. And the cupola here is relatively small. It's there, but you shouldn't really go for it. It might troll bounce, as you can see here. There is no cupola, despite, the modeling. And then there's also this big 14.5mm KPVT machine gun with just 200 rounds. It seems like 50 rounds in the magazine in a drum, and you have 3 reloads, and then that's it. So overall, the armor is a bit trollish in certain parts. It's thick, it's solid, but it's not unbeatable. That's the summary of the vehicle. So, yeah, the armor is great. What about the interior? Well, we have 4 crew members. In the middle, we have the driver. Then we have the gunner and the commander on the right-hand side. And we have the loader on the left-hand side. And it's just one loader. So immediately we can see we just have 4 crew members, a typical Russian lineup, and yet it kind of isn't. And it's just one loader, and I mentioned this because about the reload rate. It's rather fast for such a big gun. So as we can see, there is a lot of ammunition in the vehicle, and we can see those massive shells here in the frontal ammo rack, and the complete rear of the vehicle is covered with 2 lines of shells. And again, this is why this area is so vulnerable to hash and any kind of enemy vehicle that shoots there, because there are the warheads. And then there are also the big propellant charges. The rule of thumb is that you have 12 rounds in your vehicle and nothing more. So then you have this frontal ammo rack and those frontal propellant charges, those 2 warheads, and a few propellant charges here. And then this room is empty. And then it's rather spacey, to be honest. So it's not like you shoot and penetrate the turret of a Russian medium or heavy tank and you knock out all 3 crew members with 1 APDS round or a heat round. This vehicle can tank it. However, you have the very big gun breech of this massive 152mm M64 cannon. So that gets damaged quite often. Then we also have the engine and the transmission in the back. However, it's again a bit spaced out, it seems like. And yeah, that's quite something in terms of survivability. You have a lot of room. You have even areas from the side where APDS will go right through and do nothing. So it remembers again a bit like the Jagdtiger. When you remove a lot of ammunition, it has quite some survivability. A surprising amount for a Russian vehicle when it comes to getting penetrated and surviving it. But you don't have 6 crew members, you just have 4. Keep that in mind. Very often I got shot at and just with APDS and just lost the driver. So the pike nose design here and here prevents kind of the ammo racks where it's really tricky. So then that's it with the tank review for the armor and the interior. Let's have a look at some other stats. One of the aspects to understand where the vehicle truly stands is in the mobility. And right away we can see that in this comparison, especially compared to the IS-3, this vehicle has the joint strongest engine with 750 horsepower, and weight wise it's kind of very average in the middle with exactly 50.0 tons. That's giving it a precise horsepower to ton ratio of 15.0, and this is the best in this comparison. And the IS-3, well, it is just 12.1, and the Jagdtiger is 9.3. So both vehicles are literally left in the dust. Just the Su-122-54 and the M60A2 Starship can keep up. The top speed is actually very good with 50 kilometers an hour. You know, we are not talking here about a light tank or a medium tank, but a tank destroyer based on a heavy tank chassis. And you will reach this 50 kilometers an hour or come very close to it on multiple occasions. 15.0 horsepower to ton ratio is simply the horsepower to ton ratio and the mobility of the T10M. And nobody says that this is a very slow tank, is it? It is a rather surprisingly nimble vehicle for the amount of armor it has and the size of it. And that brings immediately a bit of a playstyle with it that is a flanking playstyle. We'll come back to that in a moment, and when we talk about the gun and the gun handling. But again, the reverse speed is not the best with minus 9 kilometers an hour, but again, it's far from being disastrous in terms, for example, like a Panther. Sadly, this vehicle has no neutral steering. However, it's kind of surprising how, you know, it comes around the corner when it not just has speed but also when it's fully upgraded. When this vehicle is stock, you're missing quite an important part on it. So the engine upgrades, the transmission, the filters, and also the track upgrade are not that unimportant. However, the suspension upgrade isn't. Now, in the beginning I mentioned the gun, and in fact this is the M64 152mm gun. This is the joint biggest gun in the game. And when I say gun, I exclude here the long-barreled howitzer on the FV 4005, the British 183mm hash-firing gun slash howitzer. Where the exact definition comes from, I don't know, don't ask me, I'm just recapping here the things that I read. And where the real difference comes from is that the British FE 4005 really relies on the pure hash performance. This vehicle relies on the sheer caliber. I will show you footage later on where I demonstrated where the real impact of the gun caliber comes in. So, 35 rounds is more than on the IS-3 and on the Conway. This is not surprising, but it is also more than the... it's also the same amount as on the SU-122-54. As I mentioned, 11 to 12 rounds are enough for one game, especially when you talk about the mobility where you can cap and so on, and then refill some ammunition from time to time. But that's, you know, just theoretical. The reload is very interesting. 17.1 seconds is just 0.4 seconds slower than the M60A2 Starship. Remember, that vehicle can also fire ATGMs, and it is also faster than the Jagdtiger with its 128mm. And also the gun performance comparison to the Jagdtiger is a bit interesting when we come later on to the raw performance of the APHE shell. Then there is the turret rotation speed, and the IS-3 is just 1 degree faster than this casemate tank destroyer. And with 8 degrees per second, the Object 268 just lets the SU-122-54 and the Jagdtiger look really, bad. But obviously it's not on a very modern vehicle style M60A2 Starship level, for example. The vehicle, by the way, has no stabilizer, gun stabilizer or supporting system. The gun depression is a funny story. It's minus 5 degrees. That is T10M level, and it's 2 degrees more than the IS-3. The gun elevation is 15 degrees, so that's for casemate tank destroyers kind of average, but it's much better than the Conway where you really feel it. The elevation speed, however, is very bad with 2 degrees per second. So the problem with this tank is simply that you have problems getting off a precise shot, especially if somebody tries to circle you. It's not so difficult to follow him in the general direction, but to actually get off a precise shot, especially in close quarters, when it's going rather heated, then you have just simply problems. So to learn ambush with a side shot is so in this respect very rewarding. You just have to sacrifice very precious seconds to get the gun on target, much like the Jagdtiger. So everybody knowing how the Jagdtiger plays out, gun handling wise, knows what I'm talking about. Now I mentioned the caliber so often, now I have to bring a bit of substance to that. Let's talk about the ammunition, and the first shell is the stock high explosive shell, which is the OF 530. It is a 40 kilogram heavy warhead with a muzzle velocity of 770 meters per second. So that's not too fast, but that's not something very unusual for a big high explosive shell. We have 6.86 kilograms of TNT equivalent with a very sensitive fuse and a fuse delay of just 0.1 meters. That means that shell explodes on contact with nearly everything, and then you can penetrate armor of 54 millimeters at any distance, at any angle. So this behaves not just in terms of raw penetration, but also in the amount of penetration, like a very small hash shell. But it's very, very powerful. So shot trapping, vehicles, and for example also splashing the turret front or upper casement front of a Jagdtiger or King Tiger is enough to penetrate the deck armor of those German vehicles, and the German vehicles are usually the ones with the strongest deck armor. This shell is also so big that you can set the mouse on fire or outright letting it explode if you shoot under the gun mantle, for example. But it's then a tricky shot. So then let's talk about the shell for this vehicle, which is the BR540B APHE BC armor piercing high explosive shell with ballistic cap shell. So that is a really monstrous shell weighing 49 kilograms. So for example, the APHE shell on the Jagdtiger weighs just 28 kilograms, to just put that in perspective. The muzzle velocity is not that high, especially for that battle rating. 750 meters per second, combine that with the scope, and you have at longer distances a really hard time actually hitting targets. Furthermore, the TNT equivalent of 1.12 kilograms is just absurdly high. The fuse delay is 1.5 meters, but the funny thing is that the fuse sensitivity is just 15 millimeters compared to the 28 millimeters on German APHE shells. So you have much less over penetrations, and they actually nearly never occur. So once you penetrate the vehicle, the shell goes off and does massive damage. But then there is the really strange part when we look at the penetration. And like that you would say, wow, that's actually very bad. That is not even approaching the long 88. It's just slightly better than the Object 906 with its 85mm long-barreled shell. But this is again then not the entire story. When you look at the normalization stats, the normalization for 30 degrees of angled armor is more like on par with APDS or even heat, and that's before we then mention again the armor interaction and overmatch mechanics. So this shell seems a bit strange when we then look at 60 degrees of angled surface, so angle of attack 30 degrees in this stat card here, then it's going much worse again. So the curvature of bouncing chances and penetrating is a bit weird. But then when we actually do the test shooting, then things get really strange. Now let me just interrupt the gameplay in the background here, and let's do some footage with test firing shots. So the pen of the APHE is not good enough to go through the upper casement of a Jagdtiger. And so immediately you would say, well, this vehicle can't do anything to a Jagdtiger. Maybe the lower plate, but then there is the transmission, right? Well, let's just have a few clips where I just show you how powerful this shell is. Yep, right through the upper plate of a Jagdtiger. Look at that angle, and through the transmission as well. The next shot will be very interesting indeed. That was the turret of a T-34. So let's continue with the gameplay in the background, but I hope you got the idea of what I'm talking about. Even at extreme angles, this APHE shell can penetrate and still, you know, travel very deep inside a tank and absolutely demolish it. So those were extreme shots. I did a lot of testing. The Jagdtiger guns doesn't come even close. Not even the T10M or even the AP round on the M103 / the T34. Then there was also the upper frontal plate of the T34 that I showed, where it was angled, very extreme, and I shot even through the additional track. It doesn't matter for this gun, it doesn't matter for the huge shell, it just plows through, it just goes in regardless. So it also smashes through tracks, add-on armor and spaced armor, it doesn't matter. This shell kills, and the raw penetration stats don't tell the full truth. The last ammunition type is the BP 540, which is a simple heat shell. Again, 28 kilogram heavy with 770 meters per second mass velocity, not very high, and it just can penetrate 250 millimeters of armor. That is not really that great. The damage effect is also, it doesn't feel like the 105 millimeter heat shells from the L7 gun and its variants. It's a tier 3 upgrade. I don't really think it's necessary, as you just could see the AP round is strong enough. So then there is also the 14.5mm machine gun on top. As I mentioned in the beginning, it seems like the clip is 50 rounds strong and you have 3 backups. Sadly, it doesn't get refilled in the even a cap circle, which is very sad indeed. Furthermore, at tier 3 you can research the smoke launchers, and you have 2 charges. Those are big barrels at the back of the vehicle, and they just simply drop on the ground and deploy the big smoke screen. Then in this stat comparison sheet we can see here that the vehicle overall doesn't seem to have very great stats, except for the size of the shell and also the penetration of the HE round. But then, you know, how important is it? I think I would go nearly exclusively with the APHE round. It's very simple, and again 11 rounds are enough. So the last gameplay that I wanted to show you is on Abandoned Factory. I mean, it's the map that works for me. And I wanted to show you the tactical aspect of playing this vehicle, but also where I am compared to the rest of my team. And also please notice how I can keep up or even slightly overtake the T44-100. So I go to the middle of the map because the one and only capture zone is at A. The majority of my team goes there, but I'm also joined by a few tanks. Now, I showed this map because I wanted to also show you a few downsides of this tank. I feel relatively comfortable, but I also, risking it here. If somebody goes through this area right here, he would have an easy time just simply, going for me. And here I had to adjust the gun again, which is one of the bad aspects. But then I see a chieftain, quick marking with the machine gun, and I get the kill assist. So the gun is still reloading, but the enemy players were just completely oblivious to my presence. And then there is an M60A2 Starship, and look how I have to readjust the entirety of the tank to get the shot in. And then I have no idea where this shell detonated inside of the tank, but he's still alive. So I hammer his rear and take out his transmission with my 14.5mm machine gun. And then I get shot from, the left hand side. And I have no idea where it was, but I saw some movement. But I have no idea which kind of tank it is. And it was a Hellcat. So no troll for you. So again, this shows the power of the APHE going through a truck but detonating after penetrating the side of a Hellcat. You couldn't do this with, or you couldn't rely on this with a German APHE shell that would over-penetrate. So not detonating after entering the vehicle. So the team has captured A. The few tanks are pushing together with me, and I try to just simply get some kills. I am looking for the enemy, but typical for a Russian team, my team is pushing quite hard overall. They are getting the kills, they are staying in the fight, we get a bit of air support. At the moment it actually doesn't look that good. However, as we will see in a moment, the rest of my team is very capable of coming back. Going through certain factory complexes like this is very dangerous indeed, but you can see how the vehicle just moves around. You couldn't think of doing this with a Jagdtiger, for example. And even with an Su-122-54, you have difficulties. And then, good night sunshine. It's deeply satisfying pulling the trigger and getting the one shot, even sacrificing the gun handling compared to a lot of the British tanks at that battle rating or even lower battle rating. I think overall it's just worth it. The shell just simply works. And that is just kind of, a very simple approach to the game. Just go out, flank a little bit, get side shots in. Even frontally, a lot of the tanks that you engage are, not capable of withstanding your firepower. And that's actually everything that there is to say. Before I played the vehicle, before I got the test drive from Gaijin, I didn't expect too much of this vehicle. I got reports from numerous people that this vehicle would be bad, it would be unplayable, very frustrating. Then I got my hands on it and I thought to myself, well, where is the problem, I mean, I can see the difficulties, but it's not like the vehicle couldn't overcome it. You couldn't say that the Jagdtiger is very good and at the same time saying this vehicle is unusable and bad. I mean, shots like these are not the most difficult ones, but it's the ultimate destruction that secures you the kill. And, there is no coming back, no unnecessary staying in the area, unlike with other vehicles that rely on other ammunition types. And shots like these are just deeply satisfying. I love it. So we actually now came back. You can see just 2 Russian players were taken out, while the majority of the Allied team is down. And we were not even facing the Germans, if I remember correctly. It was just American and British tanks. So in expectation of somebody respawning, I, kind of hide here between the tanks and the trains. And I look and I see planes, and I wait for my time with the machine gun. Again, the ammunition is very, very limited, but it would be awesome to have more of it, or to be able to refill it in the cap. That would be an improvement, I think. I tried to kind of readjust my gun and my machine gun. There you can see I fire a bit, but I miss, and then this happens. I survive the rockets without any damage from the front, and I critted that Bearcat, and now he has a dead engine. I hit him a few times, but no real damage, and then he comes in for the suicide run. I survive another rocket run from the Wyvern, but I don't survive the bomb. And that was my ace. That was the Object 268 for you. I hope you enjoyed the tank review. Do I like the vehicle? Do I recommend it? Well, I think it's something for specialists that look for a challenge, but it is also something that the average player could use with a simple combination of using the great horsepower to ton ratio and using the very stock friendly tank. That's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.